What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, December 5th, 2017, getting into the week here, getting into December, getting into the Christmas shoplifting season, whatever else is going on here. We've got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Some program notes so that you know where we're going in the near future. On tomorrow, in hour number 3, we're going to have Dave Gahary and Phil Turney about their book on the USS Liberty called Erasing Liberty. More about the cover-up than about the actual Israeli attack on the ship. And then on December 11th, we're going to have Mark Pendergrast, who's going to be talking about some of his new writings and articles. On December 13th, we're going to have Don Wiskin about Extendivite. And on December 21st, Donald Jeffries, who's just written a new book, Survival of the Richest. So we're going to be talking to all of those people about all of these different topics here. All right, a couple of things really going on. There is another massive wildfire out of control in Southern California in Ventura County. And apparently 160,000 people are now without power. 10,000 acres burned. They're already evacuating homes. And the fire is actually threatening the city of Santa Barbara. And actually an updated number on the acres burned, 45,000 acres. It's being driven by wind. And I'm just waiting for somebody to say that this is a terror attack by North Korea or whoever it is we want to invade, maybe Syria. Oh, we have to go back into Syria. They're burning up Southern California. But again, as the wealth of the nation is diverted to war, there is less and less to take care of the nation itself. And you can see that looking around at our decayed infrastructure, and part of that infrastructure are what are called the fire break roads. And these are roads through all of these mountains that are bulldozed. They're not paved, and they're bulldozed, and you can drive on them if you want. But their real purpose is to basically break up the underbrush into regions where if there's a fire in one, it doesn't leap to the other. So those have been neglected. Most of them are now grown over, and that's why these fires are getting completely out of control. Another big story just hit the wires a little bit ago. Russia has now been banned from the 2018 Winter Olympics, supposedly for systematic doping, and it's a punishment without precedent in Olympic history. And it's kind of interesting because it's there to basically give Putin and Russia the finger, but the IOC president, Thomas Bach, is saying Russia's athletes will be able to compete in South Korea, providing they can show they were not involved in the massive state-sponsored doping program that supposedly corrupted the Sochi Winter Olympics in 2014. Now, the athletes will have to compete under the Olympic flag and in a uniform bearing the name Olympic athlete from Russia. And if any Russian athlete wins a medal, the Olympic anthem will be played at the medal ceremony instead of the Russian anthem. So this is all about the politics. And you need to understand that there's never been any hard proof that any doping was taking place. Because this all started with a former Moscow laboratory director turned whistleblower, Grigory Rodchenkov, who basically came on out and said, oh yeah, there's been lots and lots of doping. Lots and lots of doping. So the IOC came on out and they did their own investigation. They said they couldn't confirm it. So they got another individual named McLaren to do his own report, and he came on back and said, well, the reason you can't find any evidence is Russia's obviously covering it all up. And apparently the decision to go ahead and ban Russia from the Olympics is based on yet another inside source making the claim of doping. But there's no actual proof of it. This is just more politics. Okay, we're going to grab a phone call here. Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. Every day goes by, and it's always something new. I never think it gets any more interesting, or it could, but it does. I have a few questions. The first one is about Flynn. I was watching mainstream media last night, and they were in a frenzy about, Flynn's flipping, Flynn did this, Flynn did that. I wanted to ask you, I haven't seen where he has done anything wrong except lying to the FBI, but the FBI has discredited themselves. So what's really going on here? I'm confused. I'm perplexed.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Nothing that Mike Flynn did was wrong. And it's turned out now the NSA did have a recording of the conversations between Flynn and the Russian ambassador, and all they really talked about was Russia not overreacting to the U.S. sanctions, as well as the pitch from Israel for Russia to try and block the UN measure condemning Israel for its crimes in Palestine. That's all they talked about. There was no talk about the campaign, no talk about collusion. The conversations took place during the transition period where such conversations are normal and expected. But it really is a witch hunt, and part of it may be simply that Robert Mueller, after all this time and all this money, he's got to show something. He's got to have at least one head on the wall for all that he's done, or it's going to look really, really bad. And so they're going after Mike Flynn, but they can't find anything else. And so, yeah, they're trying to make a big deal to justify Mueller's cost and expense and to keep the focus on Donald Trump. Meanwhile, we know that Hillary lied to the FBI on numerous occasions. Nothing's happened to her. And people are beginning to call attention to that, including President Trump himself.
Yeah, I was going to say the optics of this. I mean, here you have a woman that's, what's the word? Worked with the Russians, not only the Russians, the Chinese, and God knows who else she sold out to, or who else payroll that she's on. But nobody will go after her. And this is not that I dislike Trump or not that I'm angry at Trump. I understand his hands are tied on many different levels, but it goes back to the AG Sessions. I keep hearing, him and Mueller are working together. I don't buy that. I don't know if Sessions if his hands is tied, or if he is somewhat involved with this narcocracy in D.C. himself. I know there's things that Sessions is tied to with Hillary, but I don't know how. And then I wanted to jump over with North Korea. I don't know if you heard.
Well, before you go to North Korea, let me just comment on that. It has come out that, Sessions is tangled up in the Uranium One deal. And so that is something, along with several of the agents in Robert Mueller's office, they were involved in that decision process that gave Russia control of 20% of America's uranium. And so they're all trying to hush that one up because their own jobs are on the line, if not prison time. The problem that Donald Trump has trying to clean the swamp is there's nobody in the city that he can hire who's not an alligator or a water moccasin. And that's been his problem since day one. He really should have looked to bring in outsiders from outside the Beltway, people like Larry Klayman or Tom Fitton, to come on in and do the job for him, people who don't have these compromising connections with all these corrupt deals that have been going on around the Clintons for the last 30 years.
Absolutely. With the uranium one, North Korea, I was listening to InfoWars a little while ago. They had Rand Paul's father on, talking about maybe he be some type of special person going over to North Korea, but and using a libertarian / interventionist or non-interventionist partake. I'm just confused. The same thing that you say, I agree with. Why is it when North Korea fires a missile as a provocation that the United States does it or Russia does it? It's just a test. I mean, the same media that told us that Saddam Hussein had yellow cake uranium is the same media that's telling us Kim Jong-un is completely nuts. So I know that's false. I mean, do I think he's a bad guy? Yeah, I do. But I don't necessarily believe he's trying to nuke the entire world. I think he's just standing up to the big bully United States, in which we are. Absolutely, I agree we are. But I don't think we have any business messing with them. I really don't. We need to stay out of it and stop being the world's police.
Well, I agree with you, and you've hit the nail right on the head. The real threat from North Korea is that they're refusing to bow down and do what the United States demands. And North Korea has made it very, very clear that the reason they're building these missiles and these nuclear warheads is to deter another invasion by the United States of America. And that's why the U.S. is trying to get them to surrender their weapons so that they can be invaded. But they've played this game so many times with Libya, with Iraq, with Syria, that nobody's going to believe in the offer of, if you put down your weapons, we will all live in peace and harmony. Because already, after Iran agreed to the P5+1 deal, surrendered its highly enriched uranium and is allowing full inspections, still the talk of invading Iran is continuing. And Kim Jong-un and his advisors are smart enough to realize that's a pattern. And they have to understand that's a pattern.
Yeah, Kim Jong-un's my age. I mean, I'm 33, and I think he's around the same age as me. So to be a leader of a country at that age? Probably not, but so is Alexander the Great. But, I mean, I'll give him the credit, the benefit of the doubt, standing up to a bully. It's not that I'm a North Korean, sympathizer or anything. I just don't believe we need to be messing with them. Let them to themselves. We have problems here.
Well, the problem is that North Korea has, in addition to wanting to slap somebody down who's standing up to the empire, North Korea has a lot of resources. They're a major source of opium that is competing now with the CIA's opium fields over in Afghanistan. And so that's another reason why there's going to be war made on them. So the CIA can have an opiate monopoly and maximize their profits.
Yeah, keep people, bring the drugs in, put people in jail for using the drugs, and keep the revolving door going.
Yeah, that's pretty much the story. Anything else?
That's all, Mr. Mike. I hope you have a great and wonderful day, and I hope this bizarro world twilight zone that we live in ends sometime soon.
All right, well, I agree with that. It's gone on way too long already. It's like a bad nightmare you can't wake up from. All right, Kevin, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much, and we're going to do a shout-out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So getting on to Mike Flynn, basically what's going on here is that the FBI tried to set a perjury trap and grab Mike Flynn and bankrupt him, get him into a situation where he'd make some kind of a deal with Robert Mueller to say something that they could go after Donald Trump with. But the reality is that the NSA did, in fact, record Flynn's late December conversations with Russian Ambassador Kislyak, and there was not a single word in them that related to campaign collusion or inappropriate communication. And again, this is in December. The election is over. Donald Trump is the new incoming president, and his transition team. It's normal and expected for them to start opening up lines of communication with the officials of other countries with whom they're going to be doing business. That's just the way it's all supposed to be working. Now, Robert Mueller, who's still on a fishing expedition, and that's all it is, he's now subpoenaed Donald Trump's Deutsche Bank records, trying to find somewhere where there's a check signed by Vladimir Putin. And it is a fishing expedition, and a lot of people are saying, this is not your original brief. And so Mueller is out there trying to defend it, saying, well, you know, once there's a special counsel investigation, we're allowed to investigate anywhere. It's perfectly reasonable for us to exceed our original mandate and just go poking into everything. No, it isn't, because if you look at the law governing the special counsel, there's supposed to be a preliminary investigation that identifies an area where a possible crime has occurred, and then the special counsel looks at that evidence and that crime. And Mueller's gone totally off the reservation. Now, the only thing Mueller has done is that he's revoked the immunity deal with former FBI Director James Comey, which means now he can be the target of possible criminal charges. So is he going after Comey, or is he going to try and arm twist Comey to say something that can be used to harm Donald Trump? But at this point, given the recent revelations about the personal biases of people on Mueller's staff, it really is a disgrace. And nobody can take anything Mueller is saying seriously any longer. And frankly, I think Trump should be willing to weather the political storm it would cause and fire Mueller, along with a bunch of the higher-level people at the FBI who are clearly not on board with the new administration. So we've got this FBI agent, Peter Strzok, was a married Hillary Clinton supporter having an adulterous affair with a government lawyer, and in the text that he was trading with his mistress, was dissing Donald Trump. And as it turns on out, it looks like there may be more of Mueller's people who were doing the same thing. But what's really interesting is that this information actually came out last summer, and the FBI agent wasn't really fired. He was reassigned to the FBI's equivalent of Siberia. Why all the secrecy? Well, because it makes Robert Mueller's investigation look bad, as it has. But I think Robert Mueller needed a little bit of time so that he could go after Flynn and secure some kind of a conviction before this story about obvious bias in his investigation came on out. But even the Wall Street Journal is out there saying Mueller has a credibility problem. He's clearly stonewalling Congress. He's protecting the FBI. He's protecting Hillary Clinton. And he's the hatchet man going after Donald Trump on behalf of the liberal establishment and the narcocracy. Now, this FBI agent, Peter Strzok, is one of two FBI agents who actually interviewed Michael Flynn, which casts doubt on the accuracy of the FD 302 forms on which the interviews are recorded. They don't audio record. The FBI agents transcribe. And we already know FBI agents will lie on those forms because of what we saw involving the manufacturing of testimony by Vince Foster's widow regarding the silver gun. So there's fakery there. Now, Greg Jarrett has predicted that if Peter Strzok is actually put under oath to testify, he will invoke the Fifth Amendment. So there is something really nasty that's happening down over there. Now, a former FBI Assistant Director, Chris Swecker, has said that this whole affair with Strzok has cast a cloud over much of the Clinton investigation into the email server because he was involved in that. In fact, he was the guy who changed FBI Director James Comey's draft description of Clinton's email conduct from grossly negligent, a legal term that appears in the Title 18 definitions, to extremely careless, which doesn't really change the meaning. It was just an effort to try and sell this idea that Hillary Clinton didn't mean to do wrong, and yes, she was a little reckless and careless, but she wasn't grossly negligent, which would automatically have triggered an a Title 18 violation. But I think any reasonable person is going to realize that there is no functional difference between grossly negligence and extreme carelessness in terms of allowing classified information to pass from areas where it's under control into a private email server where it was available to anybody who cared to hack on in, which turned out to be very easy. Hillary's private email server had weaker security than Ashley Madison. You remember that big stink. So anyway, as I mentioned earlier, IntelliHub is reporting that apparently other members of Mueller's team have been outed for sending anti-Trump text messages. So the entire investigation, the entire team around Robert Mueller and Mueller himself, they're compromised. They have conflicts of interest. They are not unbiased. They are not being objective. They are not following the real evidence of Russian collusion to the people who really colluded with Russia over that Uranium One deal. Because it includes themselves. There are people on Mueller's team who do not want to follow the trail of Russian collusion because it means opening themselves up to criminal charges, corruption, loss of job. Talk about the fox guarding the henhouse. This is like asking Jeffrey Dahmer to investigate if there's cannibalism in Milwaukee. You're never going to get an accurate response. Meanwhile, Clint Watts is out there saying that Donald Trump is an enemy of the state in attacking the FBI. So now the FBI is the state? And actually, that's not a new idea. J. Edgar Hoover used to call his office at the FBI the seat of government. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Grab your pencils and papers, because if you'd like to help out Republic Broadcasting, keep them on the network, the address to send in check, money order, box tops is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302. And the city is Round Rock, Texas, 7864. If you want to phone in a donation by debit card or credit card, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And we absolutely do need your help to stay on the air. We are not owned by any corporation, which is why we're able to tell you things the corporations and the politicians don't want you to know. But we need your support. The only way we're going to get the big money influence out of our society is for the little money to unite together in the common cause of restoring the Republic. And as always, of course, we can always use donations over at whatreallyhappened.com. And while I'm on that topic, earlier today, we got a very generous donation. And when I tried to email the usual thank you, the email bounced. So if you sent in a generous donation and you did not get a reply, because I try and reply always, electronic to electronic, paper to paper. If you didn't get a thank you note, it's because there was some glitch in the system. For some reason, the email would not go through. But I do thank you for the support, and it really is going to make a difference for us. All right, let's take a phone call here. Charles in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I wanted to talk about greenhouse gas. It's a very big problem for the U.S., well, globally, and they attribute that to the global warming. And the two major causes for global warming are, like, number one, power generation. Number two are automotive transportation, the burning of fossil fuels.
Okay, well, first of all, you need to understand that the selection of carbon dioxide as the villain has little to do with science and everything to do with politics, because there are far more potent greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Water vapor is by far the worst one, but nobody's going to pay a cloud tax. And the second one is methane, which is 10 times as potent as carbon dioxide, but that's produced by bovine flatulence, cows, deep crust microbes, which are life forms that are far too intelligent to listen to Al Gore and his nonsense. But this was all about getting people to pay carbon taxes, getting them to submit to a global environmental authority. And the reality is that none of the dire warnings about global warming that were made over the hang on, let me just talk to our control room here. The dire warnings that were made by the global warming cult back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, none of them have come to pass. The polar bears are not going extinct. The coastlines are not flooding. And the reality is that we have actually seen several record-setting winters in a row, and it looks like we're going to get another one. That's why they've tried to rebrand from global warming to climate change. But the reality is climate has always been changing ever since the Earth was created, and it'll go on changing long after humans are here. You can no more stop climate change than you could stop the rotation of the Earth. It's just another scam. And again, it's all about trying to get economic advantage over other countries. And at this point, it is a lot of nonsense. And a lot of those early scientists and climatologists have now come on out and said that, no, they didn't really agree with it. And in many cases, their names were added to these so-called letters calling for an end to human-caused global warming without their knowledge and permission. So, again, Al Gore's not a scientist. At one point, he said the temperature of the Earth's core is millions of degrees. He's only off by about 4 or 5 orders of magnitude. He doesn't really know. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. We're going to be coming up on another point.
Hold on. One thing, though. I very much agree with you, but see, there's a simple solution for greenhouse gas emissions from our burning of fossil fuel, and it's the closed fuel system, and the only drawback to it is we get 300 miles to the gallon in our automobiles, and we get fuel-less engines for our submarines, diesel submarines. The U.S. Navy has the patents on it. It's been demonstrated. It was known in the 1930s, and there's clear footprints on this in the patent office that lead from this invention to today. It's proven.
Okay, it sounds like you're describing something along the lines of the Stirling cycle engine, and we're almost out of time in this segment anyway. But let me go on back and mention something. As it turns out, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere does not behave like a pane of glass in a greenhouse. In fact, NASA has grudgingly conceded that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is actually acting as a coolant. So the whole idea that carbon dioxide was a problem, again, it was just politics and propaganda. The EPA declared it a toxic pollutant, which is nonsense, because if you got rid of all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you would start seeing the plant life dying off, and if the plant life dies off, we die off. Carbon dioxide is an essential, necessary component of the cycle of life here on Earth. Now, as far as your closed cycle engine, if you want to email me some information, I'd be willing to take a look. But we've heard all these claims about 300 mile per gallon cars for decades, and they never seem to materialize. And with the supply of oil around the world dwindling, now would be the time for the holders of those patents to move forward with them. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. Charles, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. And I'm getting email from a bunch of people saying that apparently Trump's lawyers have issued a statement saying that, in point of fact, the story about Mueller going after the Deutsche Bank records is false and that no subpoenas have actually been issued at this point. I'm still trying to confirm through more corporate sources. But again, in this day and age, there's just so much fake information out there, and we're just trying to be as careful as we can about getting the real story about what's going on. Now then, getting on back to the FBI. Tucker Carlson is also out there saying the FBI is totally out of control. And I think a lot of people would agree with that, especially if you're my age and you remember COINTELPRO, which was this program the FBI ran back in the 1960s, and it stood for Counterintelligence Program, and it had absolutely nothing to do with detecting crime, punishing criminals, law enforcement. It was all about undermining the American people's exercise of freedom of speech. And they had a lot of different targets, chief of which, of course, was the growing anti-Vietnam War movement. They needed to discredit and destroy them. They wanted to destroy the civil rights movement. They were even going after the early feminists and Native American activist groups. And they were basically acting as a dirty trick squad. A lot of what they did were actually crimes in and of themselves. That's what the FBI is really about. Forget what you've seen in the movies. Forget what you see on TV. The FBI cultivates this image of being the good guys, but they're not. We keep seeing that over and over again. And I'm old enough to remember COINTELPRO. I was actually at Disneyland for the day that the hippies took over Disneyland. And I was invited there by a very close friend who, after it was all over, admitted it was all set up by the FBI. He was one of the FBI undercover informants, and he tried to recruit me, which is the last day I ever spoke to the, well, I can't describe him on the radio, or the radio stations are going to lose their license. But that was a real eye-opener back then. And then, of course, when I crossed swords with the FBI again, during that whole Vince Foster affair. So that's what's going on. Yeah, the FBI has been out of control. They're involved in protecting the rulers. They're there to enforce the will of the rulers. And during Vietnam, they did things like the hippie riot, which discredited the anti-war movement. They were trying to undermine the civil rights movement. They played dirty tricks like the Black Panther coloring book. They tried to get Black Panthers to assassinate each other. That's what the FBI really does. Anyway, now the Kremlin has come on out responding to this idea that Michael Flynn influenced Putin on behalf of Israel, and they're saying it's completely absurd. That yes, Mike Flynn made the pitch, but nobody was really taking him seriously. And they're saying that, Putin makes all the decisions on that level, foreign policy, and Flynn's pitch had nothing to do with it. All right, so let's get back to this Robert Mueller probe. And apparently, over the last 6 months, they have spent almost $7 million. Now, there are official budget within the group, basically running from May 17th to the end of September, total expenditure of $3,200,000. But buried in the report is the fact that the Department of Justice spent an additional $3.5 million outside the special counsel's budget to support Mueller's investigation. That's what gets us to almost $7 million. And maybe that's the reason Mueller was desperate to find somebody who could charge, Mike Flynn. Mike Flynn got to be the sacrificial lamb so that people weren't going to say, well, Mueller's just wasting time and everybody's time and the taxpayers' money. So now he's going to point to Mike Flynn's hide tanning on the wall and say, well, we got one. That's got to be worth $7 million. No, it isn't. So now we're hearing, down in Alabama, it is very obvious the Democrats are trying to steal that election. They want to get one more Democrat in the Senate because if they're hoping they can just take it all next year. Then they can impeach Trump. But according to a CBS poll, 71% of Alabama voters aren't buying the corporate media's stories about sexual assault. And that is a very strong indicator of just how far corporate media has fallen. They used to be totally in control of the minds of America back when John F. Kennedy was assassinated or all during Vietnam, all the way up to the Watergate scandal. But over the last decade, it's just really started coming apart. That's because of the rise of the independent media and the Internet, and people saying, no, wait a minute, I know for a fact this is false. Now, it took something like 30 years for the American people to reach the point where half of them understood the Warren Report was a complete fiction. These days, because of the independent media and the Internet, the life expectancy of a government lie or media lie can be clocked with an egg timer, which is why I have one right here on the desk. Whenever I hear a lie, I just turn that one over. Now, after attempting to stand tall and firm and wag his gravitas in everybody's face here, John Conyers has now announced his retirement from Congress. He is indicating he wants his son to take over his seat, proving that there is a certain feeling of hereditary right among our political class, as demonstrated by George Herbert Walker Bush and then George W. Bush and Bill and Hillary Clinton now grooming Chelsea Clinton for a run for high office. Now, here's something funny that really happened. Apparently, John McCain was getting very, very close to 3 million Twitter followers, and so he put out a tweet saying, you know, friend me, I'm almost there, friend me, or follow me. And the result was that thousands of people unfollowed him. So that's how brutal social media can be, and I hope it's a wake-up call to McCain that he's not as well liked as he'd like to imagine. And if I recall correctly, there was an article that came out last year about how many of these politicians' Twitter followers or YouTube followers or Facebook friends are actually faked. There are companies that for a fee will go on in and manufacture these numbers on your social media. And if I recall correctly, McCain's name was on one of those lists here. Now, as if we didn't have enough problems with the out-of-control government intelligence agencies, apparently the Trump administration is looking at proposals developed by Blackwater founder Eric Prince and a retired CIA officer with assistance from no less than Oliver North, who was right in the middle of that Iran-Contra scandal, which included the gun and drug running by the CIA out of Arkansas under then-Governor Bill Clinton. And what the proposal is, they're going to provide a global private spy network that would circumvent official U.S. intelligence agencies, according to several current and former U.S. intelligence officials. And the sources say the plans have been pitched to the White House as a means of countering deep state enemies in the intelligence community, seeking to undermine Donald Trump's presidency. The problem is if you've got Oliver North and this new private firm, You've brought the narcocracy right into the heart of the new private intelligence agencies. That's the big problem. You're trying to clean up the swamp, and you've hired another one of the alligators into a key position. Now, do you remember when ABC ran that bogus story that tried to make it look like Mike Flynn's contact with the Russian ambassador had been during the campaign, and everybody said, this is it, this is it. They're going to get Trump. Trump's going to be brought down. They're going to bring back Obama, or some such nonsense. And it turned out the story was completely bogus, and they put that reporter on a 4-week without pay leave, which for a person of that salary, that's got to sting. Trump is, and the stock market took a major tumble. The Dow plunged like 300 before it came on out that the story was fake news. So Trump is saying everybody who lost money on the stock market on that ought to sue ABC News for their financial losses. Sounds like a pretty good idea to me. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call now. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I got a lot on my mind, and, man, when are they going to stop poking the bear, Mike? I mean, this whole doping thing is a big fraud. It all has to do with this globalist agenda to knock Russia, just to demonize them, to alienate them, well, you can come to the Olympics, but you got to be under our flag, the globalist Olympic flag with the globalist Olympic, the corporate national anthem is, But what a joke this whole, this is a scam, Mike. It's a scam. This all started within this time period.
It's all hearsay.
Ukraine and Sochi.
It's all based on hearsay by one disgruntled Russian lab manager, and we don't know whether he was financially compensated for coming on out and saying what he said, but it's an unreliable source. And it's hearsay, and there is no laboratory evidence to back up any of it. And so in the circular logic that we see coming out of Washington, D.C., the thinking is, well, obviously the reason that there's no real evidence to back this up is that Russia hid it. Russia hid the lab results that showed positive for drug tests.
It's the timeline, Mike, from the Ukraine in 2004, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Orange Revolution originally, to the Sochi Olympics, don't go to Sochi, don't drink the water, don't look at the bathrooms because there was no stall in the middle because it was computer generated out. It's all about that. It's all about getting at Russia, getting back at Russia, and it's just going to keep accelerating. And for the gentleman who called about global warming, man, I'd worry about global warming in terms of mushroom clouds popping up all over the world because you can't keep doing this, antagonizing and just doing this thing because it's going to eventually get into like a world war. We're already in a financial world war, but this is ridiculous. This whole thing is a fraud. I can't believe how this keeps dragging on. The same with the Russian investigation. It's just the same. It's an old mentality of a dying group of old people.
Yes.
Old empire, and that includes the whole world, Mike, like Britain and France and Germany. They all got issues, because they messed up everything. That's why they got issues with migration and the economy. They messed everything up.
Well, I think they've got those issues because they've been dragged in to be part of the new globalist order and their ties to the United States. But I have to point the finger of blame at the U.S. government as really instigating all of this turmoil that the world is in right now. And as far as the Olympics are concerned, look how the NFL suffered when they got political. And they're trying to, that one NFL player just got some award from the ACLU for being a true patriot, for dissing the flag and the anthem. But the result is people have just turned on off. They want to see sports for sports. They don't want to see something that's been politicized. And I think the exact same thing is going to happen to the Winter Olympics. People are just not going to want to tune on in because it's nothing but politics on display. I don't watch the Olympics anymore. I did when I was a kid. I found them very inspiring. When I was a kid learning to ski, my ski instructor had been on the Olympic ski team, and I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. But they're so politicized now, I don't bother anymore. I really don't. And I think probably we're going to see a much larger version of the public rejection of the NFL applied to the Winter Olympics. Because what's the point of having an Olympics if it's not really being all-inclusive?
Well, the whole thing is, Mike, I watched they had the press conference, and, you know, the committee or whatever, the payoff fraudsters, because they're all part of that same network. They basically, there's no politics. Even the Pope is political. You're born into families that are political. Everybody has a leaning towards something. So to say this ain't political, it's about global politics. You know, this is a political thing, and anybody say, oh, those Russians are cheating again, they don't get it. Just go back and look at the timeline. The timeline says it all, the events of Ukraine coup and this or that with Syria, the arming of the terrorists, and, you know, we've got to kill a lot of Russians, according to those Fox military so-called analysts. You know, this is all about going after Russia because they're a threat to their world order. You know, that's what it... Hey, Mike, real quick on Saakashvili, does that mean if he goes into any buildings, they're going to give him a parachute?
I don't know about that, but he's leading the calls for impeachment of Poroshenko. And so he may find himself departing the top of one of those buildings involuntarily without a parachute.
Hey, Mike, I noticed when he had one of these groups of people behind him, you know who it was? I think it was Svoboda Party or the Right Sector. That's the Nazi Party, you know, the family. That's the group that follows the family of the World War II, you know, for Germans that were there on the west part of the Ukraine. But those are his supporters. You know, I mean, and they hate Poroshenko because he's not really following what they want him to do.
Yeah, but if you remember,
Poroshenko's on his way out eventually too.
If you remember Saakashvili's past, he's definitely been a U.S. asset. He was down in Russian Georgia, definitely tangled up with the U.S. government, and maybe the U.S. has decided Poroshenko can't get Ukraine back together, can't get the Eastern republics brought back in, and they've decided a guy who's made his fortune through criminal activity and chocolate really doesn't have the qualifications, and they may be getting ready to replace him, regime change him, throw out the old U.S. puppet, put in a new U.S. puppet.
He's a war criminal. Look how many people he killed in South Ossetia. He's a war criminal, and you know what? When the Russians came in there, the Israelis were there, and so were the U.S. Advisors, and they get out of there because the Russians rolled through that place like it was no tomorrow, Mike.
Yes, I remember that.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thanks. We're going to let you go, and the phone lines are open. Now, getting into the war reports around the world, and there are a lot of wars around the world, apparently Israel has struck Syria again. You know that last Friday they flew into Lebanon, stood on the Lebanese side of the border, and lobbed missiles over to what they claim was an Iranian facility near Damascus. And apparently they did it again, and this time 3 of the missiles got through and hit the target. But apparently they sent more missiles because the Syrian air defense system is saying they shot 3 down. So they're just ramping up the number of missiles they're sending on in there. Israel is trying to provoke an open war with Syria, knowing that would give the U.S. an excuse to invade. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, a lot of people have been wondering over this very weird situation where at least for the last 3 years of the 6-year war on Syria, the U.S. has been claiming that the only reason they're in Syria is part of the war on terror, that they're there to get ISIS and al-Qaeda. And both Syria and Russia and pretty much the rest of the world is saying, well, okay, we'll take that at face value. And now that ISIS and al-Qaeda are pretty much gone, it's time for the U.S. to go home. Syria doesn't want them there. The U.S. doesn't have Syria's permission to be there. And contrary to Mattis, there is no actual United Nations resolution authorizing a U.S. military action inside Syria, nor is there a declaration of war by the United States Congress. So apparently the U.S. is trying to find another way to justify staying in there. A week ago they were saying, well, we're going to stay just in case ISIS and al-Qaeda come back. You know, kind of like the fire department. We're just going to sit there with all of our big vehicles and our equipment, and we're going to wait for the bell to go on off, and we'll go and, you know, put out ISIS wherever they may show up. And now they're starting to make statements saying that Assad is not capable of winning the Syria war all by himself. And that's why the U.S. must stay, even though they're not wanted, to make sure that ISIS and al-Qaeda don't come on back and take over the country. And, of course, we all know that ISIS and al-Qaeda were, for the most part, working for the United States government. They were being given supplies and arms. Weapons were being smuggled to them from Libya through that consulate in Benghazi. So it was all a big hoax to begin with. And, of course, Syria is saying, yeah, we are at the point where we can finish this war by ourselves, and we're not really by ourselves because Russia's still here. And I think what's really going on here is I don't think the U.S., short of a decapitation strike on Assad, is going to be able to take over Syria. And, of course, that kind of a dramatic action would have serious international ramifications. But I think the point here is that even though they can't win, the U.S. doesn't want to have to admit they've lost. So they're just going to keep forces in Syria and say, see, we're still here, we're still fighting the war, it's still going on, we haven't lost yet. But yes, very clearly they have. They've lost in Syria, they're losing in Afghanistan. And once that sinks in to the American people, any remaining support for more wars, especially one in Iran, is going to evaporate. And I think that's the reason they're still trying to keep feet on the ground in Syria, is so they can say, we haven't lost, really. Now, Sigmar Gabriel, he's Germany's top diplomat, has come on out saying that, as far as he can tell, Russia will shape the post-war future of Syria. And that's another indication that the U.S. has lost, because the whole point of going into Syria was for the U.S. to be shaping Syria to its own interests. So right there, according to Sigmar, is another indicator the U.S. has lost this one. It's time to admit it and bring our people home. And again, in the long run, I don't see the United States being able to carry out this military plan. We've had 16 years of war. We're stuck in these quagmires in places like Libya and Syria, through the Saudi proxy, Yemen, Afghanistan. Our military is worn out. The stockpiles are drawn down. We simply can't go up against a military peer. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Getting on down to Lebanon, Prime Minister Hariri has officially, formally withdrawn his resignation. And so he is going to continue as Prime Minister of Lebanon, and hopefully that will stabilize issues in that country. And again, it's still a big mystery of just why he resigned in the first place, what influence Saudi Arabia had over him, and what they hope to accomplish, possibly demoralizing Lebanon with the absence of Hariri so that Israel could once again attack them as well. Because obviously, as we can see, Israel's attacking Gaza, they're attacking Damascus. They're loaded for bear, and they're out there just ready to start a big, huge mess that they expect the United States will come in and clean up for them. Now, a top Russian general, Colonel General Leonid Ivashov, he's a former top Russian Defense Ministry official, basically wrote a piece in Russia Today, basically saying that the concern in the Russian High Command is that the U.S. and NATO are preparing to start a war with Russia in Europe. And we certainly have seen the very obvious signs of provocations, the massive movement of arms and troops right up to that Russian border, all the while claiming that it's because of Russian aggression. But it does look like the U.S. and NATO really do want to start this war with Russia. And I'm sure the people of Europe don't want to do that. In fact, we had this rather fascinating article that was linked on the main page of whatreallyhappened.com. And the article is headlined, "People have been forbidden from entering this place for 100 years, and the reason is chilling." And it's a YouTube video, and it talks about what are called the red zones all over France. And when you see the map, there is a huge amount of the country that is off limits to the population. Nobody can go in there, because there are still highly toxic chemicals left over from World War I. There are unexploded bombs and grenades from World War I still buried there. They're trying to have a project to clean it all up and get rid of it, but they're saying it's going to be decades to try and get this stuff cleaned up. At the end of World War I, in one of these red zones, there was an entire village that was literally forcibly relocated. They just took all the people and said, go on over here, we'll give you the money to build a new village. See, for the people of Europe, World War I and World War II is a real issue. They can see the scars right before their very eyes. For Americans, war is an abstraction. We haven't really had a war on our own soil since the Civil War. And most of those battlefields and monuments and memorials have faded away and are being attacked daily to erase that. Because our government doesn't want the American people thinking about what can go wrong if we lose a world war, especially a nuclear one. So it's a very chilling video to look at when you realize that for those who visited France, probably were not even aware of this, that there are these zones you cannot go into because the weapons used in World War I are still there and still toxic. My grandfather, the one who was drinking buddies with Richard Nixon, he lost a lung to German mustard gas in World War I. I still have his helmet and his gas mask, which was apparently supplied by the lowest bidder. Now, getting on back to Ukraine and following up on Dustin's call, Saakashvili has led a march through Kiev demanding the impeachment of President Poroshenko. And so it looks like there may be a change of government or a civil uprising there as well. We're going to go ahead and take some phone calls, and we're going to start with Sean in North Carolina. Aloha, Sean. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Sean, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
I hear you now. What's up?
Hi. Okay. I just wanted to ask you a question because the news that I'm getting seems to be all over the place concerning Donald Trump. And what I mean is you got the mainstream news swearing that he's going to be arrested and put away for a long time. You got some of the independent media like Alex Jones that thinks he's really in trouble and could be indicted over it. And then on the other side, you have Dave Hodges that has a source that he says he's going to interview on this coming up Sunday show that says that Mueller has teamed up with Flynn and they're actually going to go in and reverse this whole thing, and if this indeed happens, the deep state will be gone forever. So in other words, it would be like Mueller is playing the bad guy that he's going to get Trump, but really he's in Trump's back pocket as an ace card. And he thinks that that's where the comment of this is the calm before the storm came from. So everybody is all over the place over what's going to happen to Trump over this Flynn issue. I just wanted to get your opinion on it.
Well, would you rather have us all agreeing to the exact same script? I mean, that's what the corporate media does. What your job as part of the audience is to listen to all these different theories and decide for yourself which one makes the most sense. Now, obviously, people in the independent media, they want to get their audience excited about the stories, and there may be a little wishful thinking involved because there are a lot of people out there who are still hoping there's going to be something that will happen where we will get the Donald Trump we elected in terms of going after the deep state, draining the swamp, getting Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton thrown in prison. But you can't let that wishful thinking taint your bias and objectivity. Right now, what I am seeing is Mueller hasn't found anything legally that they can go after Donald Trump. But we're seeing a system right now where if the Democrats can gain control of both houses of Congress, they'll vote to impeach Donald Trump on the flimsiest of excuses. There won't even have to be a law specifically broken for them to go after him. Because what they'll do is they'll simply say, he deserves to be impeached, he's crazy, 25th Amendment. They're still pushing that whole issue. And Donald Trump could, in theory, be removed from office, even though he certainly doesn't deserve to be, based on the available evidence that's been provided so far. But as far, again, as all of the varied points of view, that's actually a healthy thing, because there's a diversity of opinion out there in the independent media. And yes, the burden is on you to figure out for yourself what's really going on.
Yeah, it's just, it gets kind of confusing. Usually, the alternative media on big stories, they're pretty uniform because they're actually telling the truth. And you got mainstream lying. Well, okay, let's just say, all right, last question for you. If they were successful in impeaching Donald Trump for something that's clearly just bogus, do you think, not do you suggest, but do you think that that would be enough to start a revolution in this country?
I can't really answer that one. There's a distinct possibility, but again, my own bias against having violence in the streets of America may be coming into play here. I know people would be very angry. There'd probably be rioting. But as far as an actual attempt to overthrow the government, as corrupt as it is, I don't know that the American people are psychologically ready for that just yet. They haven't suffered enough. They are not enraged enough. Now, who knows what may happen in the next several months? The way things are accelerating, it could change overnight. And again, I point to the revolution in Romania, where 2 weeks before it all went down, any visitor to the country would have looked around and said, this is a happy country. Yeah, people are upset about the TV cameras on all the street corners watching the people, but no big deal. And then all of a sudden, a spontaneous protest at a sporting event turns into a political rally for everybody attending that event. And 2 weeks later, Ceausescu was machine gunned to death on Romanian national TV. It could happen that fast. It's a question of just who within the government would continue to support the government in the event of Trump's ouster, knowing that it was, in fact, totally bogus. And that's very, very hard to guess. The other issue, getting on back to what you're saying, where the independent media is normally together on the stories and now they're all over the place. Again, we're getting a lot of bogus information fed to us by that corporate media. And apparently that story about Mueller's issuing subpoenas to Deutsche Bank, now it's being denied by Trump's lawyers. So we're having to work harder than ever trying to dig through all the noise that's coming out of the corporate media, like that goof with the ABC reporter. And that actually makes the job a little bit harder. And like I said, coupled with wishful thinking, that may explain a lot of the diversity. But again, a diversity of points of view is a good thing. And originally in this country, we had laws that protected the diversity of opinion in the available media to the population. And we're getting back there with the independent media, and that's a good thing. Yes, you have to work harder, because now you're going to have to think for yourselves. Ooh, there's a radical concept there. Thinking for yourselves. The government is going to quake in their boots over that one.
Mike, I appreciate you, buddy. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, and we're going to switch over to Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike. I just for that last caller there. You can't get people to call their congressman. I don't think there'll be a revolution. As far as all these people, the men that got sacked by women accusing them of sexual misconduct, my experience tells me that you'll find that these people that they sacked are friendly to the idea of condemning Israel for war crimes against the Palestinians. That's the train of thought over in Europe. Any white male, whether Jew or Gentile, can be sacked for sexual misconduct in the entertainment industry, whether it's the news, Hollywood, TV. So I tend to think that there's more to this than meets the eye. That's all I have for today, Mike. Thanks for taking my call.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rick. It's a very complex issue, and again, having worked in film production, TV production for much of my life, yeah, there's a lot of that stuff that goes on. And there's also the reality that a lot of women will make themselves available to men in positions of power. And so it's actually not all that common that you get a complaint, but it does go on. That being said, I reject this idea of firing a politician or an entertainment executive over a mere allegation, because an allegation is not proof that something actually happened. And I know the feminists have the idea that women are pure as the driven snow and they would never lie and you should always take everything they say at face value. But we learned during the rape hysteria of the 1990s that's not true. Rape became the second most falsely reported crime in the country, according to the FBI's supplementary crime statistics of the time. So we need to be careful and judge each case individually on its merits. The pattern that is emerging right now is that a lot of these people are going quietly because they know the allegations are true and they just want this all to go away without having a public examination. Contrast that with Judge Roy Moore, who did stand up and fight back and say this is all a hoax. And accuser after accuser after accuser have been discredited and proven to be absolute liars. So, but at the moment, we do seem to have evolved this witch hunt hysteria, and the media likes it because Americans' puerile interest for any kind of sex scandal is being used to distract us from Uranium Gate, Primary Gate, Dossier Gate, all the other gates that are happening on out there. Because in the end, the fact that some studio executive has been accused of inappropriately touching an actress, it's steamy, it sizzles. It doesn't really affect our lives. But all these other issues, the wars, the selling of our uranium to Russia in a time of war, stealing the national election, stealing the primary, that does affect all of our lives, and that's why that is where our focus really ought to be. Now, I'll be very honest, because of the way I got treated by Hollywood when I tried to report that Vince Foster did not commit suicide, but he was murdered. I'm enjoying a little bit this bringing down of these Hollywood big shots. Feels a little pleasant to watch it happening there. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our honor affiliates who are just rejoining the network. Getting on back to the telephones here, we're going to go to James in Charlotte. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. You had mentioned earlier in the program that about John Conyers resigning and wanting to, as he specifically made some proposal that his son take his place. I'm not. I wasn't up on that, but or has he just basically just mentioned it to try and get it into discussion? Or
well, we don't know what's going on in the back channel, but if he resigns Congress before his term is up, then the governor of his state appoints his replacement. And so apparently Conyers, knowing that the pressure is on him to step down, he may have gone to the governor and said, here's the deal. I will step down and get out of the limelight with all this scandal stuff, and you will name my son as my replacement. Whether the governor will go along with that or not remains to be seen.
Something I happen to see, you know, he is the retiring dean of the House. He was first elected in 1964, so he's going out after 53 years of service. But he's just really a kid compared to the representative from his neighboring district. Conyers represented Michigan's 13th congressional district, and the retired John Dingell was in the 12th. Right next door, basically, Conyers represents the Detroit area, the South Shore, and Dingell represented the North Shore area. And you won't. I find this hard to believe, but his father, John Dingell Jr. is the one I'm talking about. But his father, John Dingell Sr., actually came into Congress in 1933 with FDR, and he served until his death in 1955. And John Dingell Jr. was then appointed by the governor to take his place, and he served until he retired in 2015, 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And now his wife is the representative in that seat. So I don't know. I guess they're maybe going to try for a century of of the Dingells in Congress. They're getting close to it.
Well, they are. I mean, it's becoming a very disturbing trend. I remember when Franklin Roosevelt was originally running for office, and they were attacking him like crazy for thinking that he's somehow thought he could win the White House because he was like the nephew of Teddy Roosevelt. And now we have father and son and mother and daughter patterns being set up. But, yeah, I think Conyers wasn't just making that statement lightly. He understands that his continuance in the limelight is going to harm his party, and so he may be thinking he's going to step down, and part of the deal will be that the governor of his state does appoint his son into that seat. Like I said, whether the governor will do it or not remains to be seen.
I can't help but thinking that that those two dynasties are certainly in some part responsible for the wreck that part of the state is in right now. I mean, they've seen Detroit in the space of their service in the Congress go from probably one of the finest urban areas in the United States to one of the worst, if not the worst.
Okay. All right, well...
But I just thought I'd make a note of that.
Well, Neppets never do really well. I mean, obviously, after Herbert Walker Bush got George W. Bush in, and then they tried to run Jeb Bush last year, and he self-destructed right at the beginning. We're going to have to let you go and take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, if you want to donate and help Republic Broadcasting, the postal address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. And if you want to call in a donation by credit or debit card, the number is 800-724-2719. Extension 03. And again, I really hate asking for money. When we do it, it is because it's really necessary. We're not getting rich doing this. We're not trying to get you to pay for our Christmas shopping or anniversary shopping. As a matter of fact, today is Claire and my 23rd wedding anniversary. I got her a card, and that was about it. So, again, we really do need your help to stay on the air and keep getting the information out there that people need to have. All right, we're going to go on back to the telephone calls here. We're going to go to Daniel in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Aloha, Mike, and congratulations on your anniversary.
Thank you.
Mine's in 2 days, December 7th, the day that will live in infamy. ABC's Brian Ross. I mean, this guy made the stock market plunge by 350 points. And I don't think this was a goof. I think he was directed to do that. If you remember back in 2001 in October, Brian Ross is the guy who sold us on the Iraqi link to anthrax.
Yes.
So I just wonder who's behind guys like Ross. I mean, ABC, is this like an Operation Mockingbird type thing? ABC News, they're really linked to the Council on Foreign Relations. Remember back in October 16th of 2009, the Council on Foreign Relations was talking about faking the H1N1 flu vaccine shortage. And 10 days later, ABC News came up with that story. I'm just wondering, it's just this deep state, it's like an intelligence arm
well,
media, and I think they just got caught at it.
I'm a tremendous believer in Occam's razor, and that is basically the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, and it argues against trying to find complex interconnections and links that may not be there. Now, the comment that I made about the independent media's variance on the stories about Donald Trump being a case of allowing personal bias to cloud your objectivity, and that is certainly also the case with many of these liberals in the corporate media who are just desperate to have something that they can get on out there to support their worldview that Trump shouldn't be in the White House. And there have been a lot of retractions, and apparently ABC has had to retract yet another one of their stories regarding Paul Manafort. And so it's the corporate media, again, they've lost any sense of journalistic responsibility. In fact, they've forgotten the basic principles. Fact-checking, second sources, corroboration, report the facts, and let the people make up their own mind. And the corporate media now, it's hardly indistinguishable from advertising. They're there to sell you something. They're there to sell you what somebody else wants you to think about what's going on in the world. And so I think that is the simplest explanation for what Brian Ross and some of these other people have done. The difference is, in the age of the Internet, they get called on it. And that's the difference. It's probably been going on all along. It's only recently that the people collectively, through the Internet and the independent media, are able to stand up and say, no, what you reported is incorrect. And the corporate media is then forced to retract. And in this case, Brian Ross was suspended without pay for 4 weeks.
Yeah, I'm not bleeding, I don't have a bleeding heart for that guy. I mean, they get paid millions of dollars. Back in 2001, linking anthrax to Iraq was part of the reason the United States invaded Iraq, with no proof of 9/11 conspiracies were linked to Saddam Hussein, even though that kind of stuff was floating all over the place. And when Congress decided they're going to, fund that war, I imagine their constituents were all going, yeah, we need some blood. We need Saddam's head on a platter, and that's all it takes.
Well, but at the same time, the propaganda about Iraq at the time, that he had nuclear weapons, turned out to be completely bogus. There are indications the U.S. tried to plant one, but it actually got destroyed in a friendly fire incident, and reportedly contaminated part of the Baghdad airport, and that all got hushed up. But in the end, that was a watershed moment for the American people, who could no longer avoid the reality that their government, aided by the corporate media, had told a huge whopper to trick them into a war that was really about what currency Iraq's oil was going to be sold for.
Yeah, and then, the retractions are like on page 14 next to the obituaries, a couple days later.
Daniel, I'm going to have to let you go. You've got to take another break for commercials. I apologize. We'll be back after these few words with more phone calls. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we go back to the phone lines, and they are pretty much loaded up, we had a caller the other day who called on in and said, where exactly is the U.S. at war right now? And it's rather hard to find that information out. But somebody just sent me this article from The Nation, and just in the area of U.S. Special Forces, you're going to find out how many nations that we're engaged with militarily, and the number will shock you. According to Ken McGraw, a spokesman for Special Operations Command, this year alone, U.S. Special Operations Forces deployed to 135 nations. That's 70% of the countries on this planet. So now you know who the aggressor is. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Cody in Texas. Aloha, Cody. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Going back to the corruption in the FBI, et cetera, one only has to go back to the siege in Waco to see just how corrupt the entire Department of Justice is and how they cover for each other. They're like inbred cousins or something. It's disgusting the way they operate and think the American people are so stupid. We just, we'll wait till the next headline comes out. We'll forget all about what's going on.
Well, yes, Waco was definitely a travesty. The BATF was trying to stage a publicity stunt to boost their reputation. It got out of control, and the FBI was sent in to clean up the mess and make sure there were no witnesses, or no survivors, rather, who would counter whatever official story they were going to craft around it. And that involved basically gassing this church full of women and children with a poison gas that's illegal to use on enemy troops in time of war, and the propellant that they used to mix the CX gas with and then blow it into the church was itself highly toxic. I think it was methylene chloride, which is the chemical they use to bend plexiglass to make those shields that hang over the salad bars, and that was very, very toxic. And we know that the gas attack is what killed those people because for the few autopsies that were allowed to go forward, none of the lungs showed signs of smoke inhalation. So they were dead before the fire really got underway. Then you have TWA 800 and the very obvious signs of the FBI trying to cover up this accidental shoot down of this passenger liner by the United States Navy. And even though the official story kept changing, originally from terrorist attack to spark in a fuel tank. And it was a classic illustration of manufacturing fake news and fake lab experiments to sell the official story. But these days, people just aren't buying this stuff naively the way they used to. And that's a healthy thing.
I think the Internet is going to really blow this out. There's people that are smart enough to do their own critical thinking. They're doing their own investigating, not relying on the corrupt media. And we're going to get to the bottom of this. It may take several years, but we'll eventually get to the bottom of this and change this government back to what it used to be.
Well, I hope it won't take quite that long, but I certainly agree with you. I don't think our present government can be saved. It is irredeemably corrupt. And as far as the Internet, yes, it's become a serious threat to the government and the corporate media because they can no longer lie to the public and be believed. And they've been doing that for so long, that's all they know how to do. They don't know any other way to run a country. And as a result, we're seeing the Internet and the independent media under constant attack. My web server got hit something like 30 times this morning. That's how scared they are of the independent media right now. And we're literally in a war in cyberspace, which is, I think, a better place for it to be happening because the children can play in the streets without fear of shrapnel. But it really is a war. And now they're taking away net neutrality. So the big media corporations will get the best access, and they're going to try and shove the rest of us off into a little tiny corner. So, yeah, it's going to be a fight. And a lot of what we're seeing happening right now has its parallels to the social upheaval that occurred when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing. And books became affordable to the middle class. Literacy exploded. People started writing books that started saying certain things you've been taught about history or the church are inaccurate. And it led to this attempted backlash by the ruling class and the churches to try and shut it all down. But in the long run, printing and books and literacy won on out, and the same thing will happen with the Internet. There are too many industries that are now dependent on the Internet for them to simply shut it down, and censorship never really holds out in the long run. So, yeah, these are very, very difficult, trying times right now, but in the long run, yes, truth will prevail. In fact, you could almost write most of human history as a constant battle between rulers trying to control what their people think and know versus the occasional technological breakthroughs that allow the public to educate themselves more, such as writing, newspapers, later on radio, TV, telephone, and now the Internet. And during each of these social upheavals, the existing order either evolves to adapt to the new environment of a better educated, more skeptical population, or they go extinct. We saw that in Gutenberg's time, and we're probably going to see it happen in the present situation as well. Okay? All right. Well, that was Cody in Texas here, and we're going to switch over to Dave in Missouri. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just want to say God bless you and howdy. I called you about a month ago. Shared my story of meeting Hillary Clinton when she was on the Walmart board in the late 80s.
I recall that.
How she absolutely terrified me as a young man when nothing could scare me because I wanted to put the American-made department in the super center, but the die had been cast to sell out our industrial base for the profits. You know, Walmart was making 20 to 30% of American-made merchandise, which was built to last, and then all that cheap import garbage that they were able to then bring in the back door, ultimately through communist China, to finance global communism that's a threat to everybody today. They were making triple-digit profits off of it. So it's pretty easy to understand. But I don't really want to get into that, Mike. I want to share something with you. We're on the road right now. You know, we're truck drivers. I travel with my wife. We're driving through Indiana on the way to Ohio. And I don't often get to catch your show live just by the nature of my schedule. But I did get to catch you Friday, and for the first time, heard wonderful Lady Claire. Now, she impressed me so much, and my wife just instantly fell in love with her. And maybe you've shared this story before. Maybe it's too private, but I would love to hear how you picked up such a fine thing. You know, I just love to hear a little about the personal story. I want to go on to one more thing. I hate to say happy day of infamy. I do want to recognize the lives lost today in 1941 for the Zionist agenda that propelled us into a war we never should have been a part of and slaughtered untold millions. You know, and I wonder what you think about this. You know, there's a lot of speculation now that Hitler probably survived. I'm kind of believing that. I believe he was probably a Zionist tool as well to propagate the agenda to ultimately have a greater Israel. Now, I'm going to go on to another thing. How can Israel and the Zionists really believe that they can absolutely turn the whole world into their slaves, murder at will for infinity, and never escape? How can they really believe? Why hasn't history taught them something? And I want to ask one follow thing. I've seen the Clintons escape forever like you have. These sealed indictments, in your estimation, this is my thinking, maybe this is reverse blackmail. I don't see anything coming from it. If you were going to indict somebody, you would do it in the open. A sealed indictment, and you've made this point, some have existed since Nixon eras and have never been prosecuted. So is this just Trump trying to blackmail the blackmailers? Or do you think, or can you envision something coming from all of this where we can actually see justice instead of just us? And I'll hang up and listen to you. I love you.
Well, before you hang up, how are you listening to my show if you're out there in your truck?
I am listening to you through Ron Gibson. He posted on YouTube, and I got your live show running through YouTube on my phone and I'm on my headset. So I'm completely legal. I can't be on the phone per se, but I can use wireless communication. So I'm completely legal, but I'm able to listen to you while I'm driving down the road running through Indiana, which, by the way, it's been a beautiful day today. A little chilly, but still a beautiful day.
All right. Well, drive safely, and thank you for the call, and I hope I can remember all the points that you raised here. But as far as the reports of sealed indictments, I think there's an attempt to try and trick people into heightened expectations that finally something will be done about the narcocracy and the Clintons. Then the hopes are dashed. Then they come on back and say, well, now this may be happening. And the idea is to basically burn us out, to get our hopes up time after time after time, and again, have them dashed over and over until finally we just quit thinking about it at all. And I think that's a lot of what all this sealed indictment nonsense is there are two camps out there. One is saying the sealed indictments are against Hillary Clinton and all of her people. The other one is saying it's the pedophile network. There are even people saying that it's actually both because of all the overlap there, especially through Podesta. So that is what I think is going on with that. By the way, Pearl Harbor Day is actually Thursday, and there will, of course, be commemorations here on Oahu, and basically I can look out my little office window down there, not only at the Missouri, but at the Arizona Memorial as well. And I remember when Claire and I first moved here, one of the first things we did was visit the Arizona. And even knowing that the official story is false, it is still a very stirring thing to actually stand where it all happened. As far as Adolf Hitler surviving World War II, a lot of people have said that, yes, that actually did happen, that he had a look-alike, which a lot of leaders do. I mean, Hillary had a look-alike. Remember after she passed out at the 9/11 commemoration? And all of a sudden, her look-alike was out there saying, yes, I'm Hillary, I'm fine, and everything. So it's a very common thing for rulers to do. The story is that it was Adolf Hitler's double who was actually killed and burned to fake Hitler's death, and he did get out there and he went to South America, and I've got a very convincing picture of a much older Adolf Hitler that was supposedly taken down in South America. We'll never know until somebody decides to come forward with a little bit more hard evidence on that. And finally, as far as Claire and I, how we met, no big deal there. We literally bumped into each other at a Jack in the Box restaurant in North Hollywood. And I was standing behind her in line, and she was wearing a T-shirt that said, Modulating Menace. I love deceptive cadences, which is music humor. And I was wearing a Magic Castle T-shirt. And she basically turned around and smiled and said, I like your T-shirt too. So we had lunch together. And she asked if I could do some magic shows for her church. And I called her next Monday for a date, and the rest, as they say, is hysteria. And it's been more than a marriage. It has been an adventure. Claire just said amen to that. But we are very happy with each other. I'm very fortunate to have such a wonderful marriage. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I have no sympathy for these people who go out cheating on their spouses. Is it really worth risking that? So, anyway, let's see. I've wandered down memory lane enough. Let's go to Dave in Panama City Beach. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Listen, I'll make it real quick. Robert Mueller was appointed the special counsel by our deputy, I guess you say, attorney general. And I wondered why they picked Mueller, you know, and I got to thinking, Mueller was appointed the Attorney General just 1 week before 9/11. He was the Attorney General. So all the investigation that was going to be done about 9/11 was going to run through his office. Now, Trump's up there and he's saying, hey, I want to get to the bottom of what happened to 9/11. And within, 1 or 2 months, you got Mueller over there, and he's basically saying, go into 9/11, and I'm going to clip your wings. And I've never heard anybody really talk about that. About why did they pick Mueller? You know, I mean, he's supposed to be the Attorney General for 10 years. Obama gives him an additional 2 years. And it's just awful suspicious that 1 week before 9/11, he's made the Attorney General. And then when Trump's going to get to the bottom of 9/11, you know, they throw Mueller on top of him to basically put him in check to where he can't go back and check anything about 9/11. I just thought that was odd, and I wanted to bring it to your attention.
Well, you raise a good point. And again, the problem is that we're not dealing with just an inner core of corrupt individuals. We're dealing with an entire government that is hopelessly corrupt. It's a much simpler task to keep count of the people who are not corrupt, you know, like Ron Paul and Cynthia McKinney. But yeah, there is that connection. Because again, there are two classes of secrets in Washington, D.C. There are the little tiny secrets and scandals that are brought out to fight political battles, like all these sexual assault charges. Then there are the great secrets, ones that are so horrible they would bring down the government. the truth behind the Kennedy assassination, the truth behind 9/11, the truth behind Hillary's email server. Those are secrets everybody is going to work to protect because it means everybody would lose their job if the truth ever came out to the American people.
Right, right. I just thought it was really odd, the guy that 1 week before 9/11, they fired the old Attorney General, make him the Attorney General. I know he was a deputy Attorney General for a few months, but, you know, they fired the Attorney General, and they make him the Attorney General 1 week before 9/11, and then Trump's out there saying what he's going to do about 9/11, and the next thing you know, boom, you know, they stick him over there as a special counsel. I just don't believe in coincidences, you know?
No, I don't either. And you need to remember also that Bill Clinton replaced the head of the FBI literally the day before Vince Foster's body was dumped in Fort Marcy Park. So obviously he needed to make sure that he was going to have somebody on his side. And that's a really good way. Hey, I'll promote you to the top job as long as you look the other way over this little issue. Anyway, listen, Dave, we're going to have to let you go. We're about to take another commercial break. We've got other callers waiting on the line. Very busy on the phones today, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to the show here. And that pleasant little bit of music, of course, was by Claire from her album Christmas Without Borders. And it's holding up through the years. What can I tell you? Always a joy to hear that. A little bit of update on the Southern California fires. Apparently, the Thomas Fire, more than 50,000 acres. Creek Fire, 11,000 acres. Rye Fire, more than 1,000 acres. And complicating the issue, of course, are the Santa Ana winds, which are just blowing these things completely out of control. All right, let's go back and grab some phone calls here. And I think the next one is Frank in North Carolina. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Frank, are you there?
Lost Frank.
We lost Frank? Okay, then let's go over to Gil in Arizona. Aloha, Gil. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm hoping that you can give me a little sympathy since I've got you beat by about 15 years.
You have my deepest sympathies. I mean, I almost feel like since I had my 65th birthday, it's like everything is falling apart. And I was telling Claire the other day that when I said I wanted to grow old together with you, this wasn't it.
Yeah, it's nothing I planned on either, but it's inevitable. And anyway, I hear your appeals for help, and I'm an old guy, obviously, on Social Security, and I try to support groups you know, with like thinking that we are, especially you. So I'll be sending a small Social Security part of my check anyway. But I'm a little worried about something, and I'd like your comment on it. I also support other groups, for instance, American Free Press and some of the Holocaust revisionist groups. And, you know, there's a way that they're putting us out of business. They're banning credit card payments from American Free Press, for instance. And I'm kind of worried that this is going to happen all over to people like yourself and so forth. So anyway, just like your comments on that, and I'll hang up and listen.
Okay, well, as far as whatreallyhappened.com is concerned, we don't accept credit cards anyway. Donations are either postal or through PayPal, and if PayPal decides to block credit cards, well, again, it's not the first time we're going to be interfered with. They're trying to cut off the money, trying to cut off the server. As I said before, there really is a war going on right now in cyberspace, but better there than in the streets of our country. All right, so it looks like the phone lines are open. We're going to get back to the news here. Niger supposedly has given the U.S. Defense Department permission to fly armed drones out of the Nigerian capital to basically expand the American military's footprint in Africa, and the Pentagon says the flights will start within days. So we've gone from not even knowing we were in Niger to the ambush that killed some Americans, and now we're dropping bombs on Niger. Anyway, China has deployed jets to the South China Sea, again reasserting the fact that those islands do belong to China. And again, China has a legal claim on them due to the Cairo Convention at the end of World War II, which the U.S. signed. And that Cairo Convention basically took all the lands Japan had conquered during World War II and returned them to their original owners, in this case, China. So China has a valid claim on that. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back with hour number 3 of our program. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And as you know, the United States and South Korea Air Forces have kicked off a major aerial drill on the Korean Peninsula, the largest ever. The official story is we do this all the time, but they're clearly training for penetration strikes into North Korea, targeting their missile facilities and their nuclear weapons development areas. So it's a big saber rattle. North Korea is very nervous. Interestingly enough, China's People's Liberation Army Air Force has started their own wargaming in the region, which is seen by some as sending a message to South Korea and the United States to back off. Because, again, it's the United States that's creating this mess, going into all these countries, trying to disarm them of their weapons of deterrence, and then invading anyway. They've done it to Syria, to Iraq, to Libya. Looks like they're about ready to do it to Iran, and now next on the list is North Korea. Now, the White House has been briefed on a new weapon system called CHAMP, which stands for Counter Electronics High Power Microwave Advanced Missile Project. Oh, they love their acronyms over there at the Pentagon. And basically, this is an extremely powerful microwave transmitter housed inside an air-launched cruise missile dropped from a B-52 bomber. And it's basically being claimed that this could disable North Korean missiles before they are even launched by simply frying the onboard electronics. Well, that all depends on exactly what the missiles are clad with, because as you know, the thin metal on your microwave ovens is what keeps those microwaves from getting on out into the kitchen and cooking you along with the macaroni. But apparently, in an interview with NBC News, Mary Lou Robinson, who's chief of high-power electromagnetics at Albuquerque's Air Force Research Laboratory, says the weapon is designed to disrupt electronic components, such as those used in ground control systems and in missiles themselves. Sort of a small-scale EMP effect, more directed, more localized here. It also sounds like something that could be used to down an aircraft and make it look like pilot error, like, oh, Paul Wellstone maybe. Now, they've had an earthquake in North Korea, and it is a genuine earthquake. Seismologists are saying it wasn't a nuclear test, but it occurred less than 2 miles from North Korea's nuclear test site. And the concern is that this is an indication that all the nuclear tests in that mountain have caused the local geology to be damaged and fractured. And it's another reason why North Korea would probably be well advised to start looking at a new test location. Now, they don't have as much land as the United States does. You ought to go out on Google Earth sometime over to Nevada and look at that huge chunk of ground where they were testing all the nuclear weapons, both above ground and below ground tests. It just goes on for miles and miles of craters. Now, despite the machinations of AIPAC and Israel, the United Nations voted in the General Assembly 151 to 6 against Israel, declaring it an occupying power with no rights to Jerusalem. Now, this is the General Assembly, and the General Assembly resolutions tend to be symbolic unless they are passed on to the Security Council. But they passed 6 resolutions on Thursday affirming Palestinian rights and condemning Israeli violations of international law. One resolution declared that any actions by Israel, the occupying power, to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration on the holy city of Jerusalem were illegal and therefore null and void. and the resolution was adopted by an overwhelming majority. The nations that voted against it were Canada, the Federated States of Micronesia, Israel, the Marshall Islands, Nauru, and of course the United States. 9 countries abstained from the vote completely. Israel right now holds the world's record for defiance of most United Nations resolutions. And of course, that's why they work so hard to have the United States up there in the Security Council to exercise their veto to protect Israel from the consequences of its actions. The idea of Israel is we can do what we want, you're not allowed to talk about it, complain about it, or punish us for it. And one of the issues raised by our truck driver who called into the show that I failed to address at the time was, how does Israel think they can just go on behaving like this? It's actually a part of their religion. And not so much the Torah, which is the Christian Old Testament, but in the Talmud, which is far more, shall we say, aggressive. And they're absolutely convinced that when all of the world's wealth is under their control, that is when the real Messiah is going to show up. And it's very frightening to think in this nuclear age, when we have computers and space flight and all this other technology, that geopolitical decisions are still being made based on the writings of Bronze Age shepherds. All right, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. But this issue over Jerusalem, this is definitely a hot potato. And Trump was supposed to make an announcement about moving the embassy yesterday. He did not do so. Kushner came on out and said he's still looking at the facts. But countries around the world are saying this is not a good idea. Erdogan is warning Trump. Jerusalem is the Muslims' red line, and could even prompt the cutting of Turkey's diplomatic relations with Israel. There have been warnings from, obviously, the Palestinians, other Muslim countries, the Arab League as a whole. If Trump moves that embassy, it could result in almost all of the Arab nations, except Saudi Arabia, forming an alliance with Palestine. And that's going to be a big headache for Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, here's a bizarre story. This came on out from Mondo Weiss. And apparently the story is that an American Jewish visitor to Israel revealed that he had to sign a loyalty oath to Israel just to get a tourist visa. That if you want a tourism visa to Israel, you have to sign a loyalty oath, even if you're Jewish American. And I got to tell you, Israel just dropped off my bucket list. I'm not going to sign a loyalty oath. I have a real hard time with loyalty oaths. I remember when I was teaching at another of the schools here on Oahu, computer animation, nothing about politics, nothing about any of that. And they wanted me to have a loyalty oath. And I said, I do solemnly vow that I will preserve, protect, defend the Constitution of the United States of America, so help me God. And they said, that's not the oath we have. And I said, that's the only one you're going to get. And if it's good enough for the president, it's going to be good enough for you. And they accepted that. They accepted that. And I taught for one semester over there at that other school. It's a lot of fun. Wonderful kids. Very talented. Very brilliant. All right, we're going to take a phone call. We're going to go to Eric in Tennessee. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. How are you tonight?
Oh, hanging in there.
Okay, good. I want to talk about all wars are bankers' wars.
Okay.
And we have a way to beat the bankers now through the cryptos. Bitcoin, Ethereum, the various other coins, Litecoin out there. These are all privately traded coins. So you come to me, you want to buy a house, and you're going to give me 50,000 or whatever, 500 Bitcoin or whatever the amount of the value of the house is. And it's a private peer-to-peer transaction. There's no bank involved.
Well, not yet.
I would like you to do something.
Not yet, but the fact is that if the cryptocurrencies prove to be a significant threat to the private central banks, they'll move to control it. to either have it issued from
They're
their
already
hands.
trying to move to control it, but they can't. They can't control it because it's all private. It's from me to you or you to me, or person to person anywhere in the world.
Well, let's look at the evolution.
That's the beauty of the Bitcoin.
Let's look at the evolution of our currency. When I was a kid, long time ago, you would look at the front of a Federal Reserve note and say, this note is legal tender for all debts public and private and can be taken to a bank and traded for lawful money, which meant the silver coinage, which was the money. Well, following the removal of silver from our coinage, following the assassination of John F. Kennedy, that message on the Federal Reserve note changed. And it simply said, this note is lawful tender or legal tender for all debts public and private. It would be very easy for them to add a new word to it saying, this note is the only legal tender for the settling of all debts public and private. And with the iron-fisted control,
they are already trying to define.
Yeah, well, all they need to do is get Congress to pass a law saying that alternative currency systems are all going to be considered counterfeiting. Remember the Liberty dollars when they came on out, following their issuance of the Ron Paul dollar, they got shut down under the claim that use of the word dollar constituted counterfeiting, even though there was absolutely no similarity between the Liberty dollars and the U.S. coinage. But that was the excuse that they used. But dollar is not a U.S. trademarked, copywritten term. Other countries and currencies use it. Okay. So the reality is...
Remember you used to talk about the electro?
Yeah, I'm sorry?
You used to talk about the electro.
Yeah, I did.
Which was a currency exchange.
I did.
Well, that's what Bitcoin is. So,
well, the whole point of the electro was to return the currency to a commodity base using a commodity which will increase in supply as the population grows, which is what prevents manipulation and hoarding.
Bitcoin is done, except they put a limit on it, on how much the supply will ever be. So the value will continue to increase. And my challenge to you is just open up go to blockchain.org, open up a blockchain wallet, and post your QR code online so I could donate to you with Bitcoin.
Well, I tried that one time before.
Others.
I think they were charging for that, and I just didn't have the room.
No, it's free. It's a totally free wallet.
All right, so it's blockchain.org. All right, I'll do that more for the educational benefit.
Set up a free wallet and put it on your website, and I'll send you $50 the minute it's there.
All right. Well, thank you. I accept your generosity, and I'll get that set up.
Yeah, talk John Stadtmiller into doing the same thing, and then I can donate to Republic too, because I got a little bit of Bitcoin laying around that I can donate.
Okay. Then I'll have.
You get it.
I do need to know more about it. I concede I don't know enough about it. My point of view on it is... Okay, Eric, I need to talk a little bit here. My concern about Bitcoin is twofold. One, if it does become a significant threat to the Federal Reserve, they will find some way to either stamp it out or take complete control of it. China's already, their central bank is already on the warpath against Bitcoin. The second concern I have is not being tied to a commodity base. It is subject to manipulation, and frankly, I'm very concerned about the wild fluctuations that we're seeing in it right now. I'm frankly getting a strong sense of tulip here. And there was another cryptocurrency, I can't even remember the name of it, and somebody helped me set up for that. And the state of Hawaii declared it illegal, said it was fraudulent, and that was the end of that. So, again, the electro isn't necessarily a cryptocurrency system. It is a means to restore the currency to a commodity base with a commodity that is safe from manipulation and hoarding. Anyway, Eric, thank you for the information. I will look into blockchain.org.
Thank you, Michael.
And we're going to let you go here.
Okay.
And thank you very much for the phone call. Now, something else that Israel is doing in response to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is they are out there trying to conceal the names of these companies that are operating illegally in the Israeli illegal settlements out of concern that the United Nations is getting ready to publish this list of companies that are doing business in these illegal settlements that would lead to people desiring not to do business with them. And again, a boycott is a recognized form of peaceful protest protected under the First Amendment. But Israel hates that First Amendment. And apparently, according to a report in Associated Press, Israel is now trying to find a way to hide company names or to change them. So when the list comes on out, it's no longer up to date and current. One thing that Israel has been known to be doing is to actually have the office for the company inside Israel proper, but all the manufacturing and order fulfillment will be done in the illegal settlements. So they're out there, again, on stolen Palestinian land, running these businesses, and what supporters of Israel need to understand is these companies have an economic advantage, even over companies operating completely within Israel, because they're operating basically on land they're not having to pay for. And that gives them an advantage over other companies here in the United States, all across Europe, Israel itself. Now, finally, we're starting to see some members of Congress show a little bit of spine, or maybe this is just a little bit of posturing ahead of next year's elections, because Friend of Israel is no longer an election winner. In fact, it's an election liability. A lot of candidates will now have two campaign websites, one for the general public, which makes no mention of their support for Israel. Then there'll be a second one that targets the Jewish voter, in which all that this candidate has done for Israel is proudly on display. But apparently, in a very rare move, 10 U.S. senators have written a letter to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling on him not to demolish the Palestinian village of Susia and the Bedouin community of Khan al-Amar in the occupied West Banks, and saying that these threats to demolish these communities are particularly distressing in light of Israel's efforts to dramatically expand settlements throughout the West Bank. Now, in September, the Israeli human rights group Bet Salem said the demolitions would be war crimes for which Netanyahu and other top officials could be personally liable. And it wouldn't be the first time there as well. Now, getting on over to Korea. As you know, the United States has sent some of our very best, newest weapons over to South Korea to soar across the skies and send a message to North Korea, including F-22s and F-35s. And already it's turning out to be an embarrassment. Yesterday we reported that one of the F-22s suffered a failure. It was able to get back to its air base and land safely, but it had to be towed off the runway. Little bit of a whoopsie and an embarrassment. Well, today, apparently an F-35 on one of these training missions for these air exercises lost a piece of its fuselage in flight. Now, this apparently actually happened on November 30th, but it's only just being allowed out. But apparently, the F-35 did get back and it landed safely. But this is an airplane that can't stay intact in flight. What's going to happen when it's actually being fired on? Now, Russia and Venezuela have agreed to a new massive arms deal. And Venezuela is the largest operator of Russian armament and military hardware in the Latin American region. And the Russian side has delivered various armaments worth an impressive sum of money. So what the world has seen in Syria is that Russia's weapons work better than the American weapons, and they are less expensive. And so country after country after country is going to get their weapons for the coming war from Russia. And again, having the F-35 have parts come off of it in flight is not going to impress anybody. We may be sending the wrong message to North Korea. They're up there with their binoculars saying, whoa, look at all the problems they're having with these things. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and continuing on the theme of American weapons not working as well as they might. Apparently on last November 4th, there was a situation in which Yemen fired a ballistic missile at a site near the airport of the Saudi capital of Riyadh. And it was presented at the time as having been foiled by U.S. Patriot missiles fired to intercept the incoming threat. But experts are now expressing doubts about that. Researchers were analyzing the remnants of the Yemeni missile, which actually did hit its intended target. And they say the missile, having split into two pieces, was not a sign that the interceptors actually worked, but rather something the missile was built specifically to do. Which, if you think about it, would actually make sense. If the missile has exhausted its fuel, and it's getting close to the target, and it lets go of that tail section, that's going to confuse anything coming on in. But in this case, there is no indication that the Patriots actually hit this. And they're saying that the Patriot missiles missed the target entirely, or maybe they hit the back half of the missile after the warhead had already detached. And either way, it didn't do any real good. Now, remember when Patriot first came on out, they trotted it out for the war in Iraq, and they were proclaiming a 99% success rate. And then they sort of hemmed and hawed and cleared their throat after the war was over and said, well, it's about 50%, but you buy twice as many of our missiles, and it's still just as good. And then other experts came out and said, no, it really didn't do all that well. And again, all of these air defense systems are based on the idea of a predictable ballistic inbound path. Now, the Russian reentry vehicles, and presumably by now the Chinese, maneuver. They change course, they flip back and forth, they corkscrew, and that makes a ballistic prediction impossible. Now, the reason Israel's having so much problems with the Iron Dome is that when the real Gazans really uncork on them with their homemade missiles don't fly very straight. And that's why Israel has to fire 8 or 10 Iron Domes trying to hit a single incoming rocket. Now, continuing on this same theme, article that came out of Russia today, apparently 1 out of every 5 British soldiers is not ready for combat because of medical conditions. Like the United States, Britain has been lowering the standards for people who want to enlist in the military. And apparently the Royal Navy has so many of their ships out of commission, they might be forced to call on the French Navy in order to get their soldiers someplace where they need to go into battle. And somebody somewhere is thinking we're going to prevail in a world war against Russia and China with this kind of military, or maybe they're thinking they're just going to go ahead and fight it all with nuclear weapons. And again, I don't think we're going to win that one either. We really are living in a lunatic asylum, and the lunatics are in control. Now, according to the Congressional Budget Office, Donald Trump's military buildup is going to cost an extra $683 billion over the current military spending plans over the next decade. And they're talking about huge amounts of money. The base budget would have to reach $688 billion by 2027. That's 20% larger than the peak defense spending during the 1980s. Sooner or later, they're going to run out of money. They can try and print new money, but that's not going to do any good, because if you print too much of that money, it devalues. You're not able to buy any more. You're spending more on paper. Everything's more expensive, but you're not able to acquire anything more. And, of course, the other aspect of it is that our current military-industrial complex is very wasteful in their spending. There's still something like $6 trillion that vanished from the Pentagon, and nobody knows where it went. They were trying to track it down, but unfortunately the airplane that hit the Pentagon on 9/11 actually flew around the Pentagon to the other side, then came back in and crashed right into the offices of the accountants that were trying to find where all that money went. How lucky for somebody who got that largesse. Now, turning over to the domestic economy over at Damagood.com, they're saying Social Security is in trouble. We've been saying that for a long time, going all the way back to when Bill Clinton looted Social Security to make his magic federal budget surplus. And this article is pointing out that for the majority of Americans right now, they may never be able to retire. That's always been the carrot held out on the end of the stick. Work long, work hard. When you reach the age where you're starting to lose your functionality, you can retire and live the life of leisure. And now we're in a country where the attitude is going to be work them until they drop. Find something for them to do. George Carlin even predicted it. He said they're coming for the retirement money. They want it all. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha America. Welcome back to our show here. And again, get out your paper and pencil. If you want to donate to Republic Broadcasting and keep us on the air, keep getting the truth on out there, the address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. Or if you want to phone in a donation, 800-724-2719, extension 03. And if you want to donate to whatreallyhappened.com, there's a donate button right at the top of the main page there. And it's all needed and welcome and greatly, greatly appreciated, because one of the reasons it's hard for us to do these begs, we understand you're all in the same position that we're in, driven down to poverty by the machinations of Wall Street and Washington, D.C. Now, checking on the email over the commercial break, over the station identification break, a couple of things came on in. We got one email reminding us that Robert Mueller was appointed director of the FBI, not Attorney General, 1 week before 9/11. And I had recalled that he was head of the FBI, but I wasn't sure about this issue about him being Attorney General. But no, he was appointed FBI director 1 week before 9/11. So a little bit of a correction on that one. And somebody else wrote on in response to the caller about money, saying that the money issue has already been resolved in the Constitution. All we need to do is to go back to the original economic system this nation was founded on, and we'll be fine. And that absolutely is the reality here. Cryptocurrency is not going to save us. What we need to be saved from is the private central banks, who have hijacked the economy and turned it from a public utility into a for-profit private venture. Now, apparently the Italian banks are not doing well, and apparently there is something like 114 banks that are in serious trouble, where they have non-performing loans exceeding their tangible assets. That's 114 Italian banks, and a total of 318 billion euros worth of bad loans. And so what are they going to do? Well, they're going to have a bail-in. We'll just take more money away from ordinary people and we'll give it to the bankers, because the bankers mean well. It's not like it's their fault. Yeah, it is. Everybody involved in private central banking is part of this giant scam to enslave the people of planet Earth with this artificially manufactured debt obligation. Now, Jim Rickards is out there saying that if we were to go back to a gold standard today, the only way we would not have another depression is you'd have to have gold priced at around $10,000 an ounce. And I think if we had not seen year upon year of gold price manipulation to keep it low, to keep it unattractive, to keep people in their savings accounts and in the equities markets, and to keep gold down so that places that played fast and loose with other people's gold, like the New York Fed, Morgan Stanley, Bank of France, Bank of England, can replace that gold at a lower cost. I think if that rigging had not been there, gold would be at around $10,000 an ounce. Now, there's an article over here from Damagood.com about how the deceptive tax reform bill cheated America. And let's be very honest, throughout the entire history of the United States, every time there's a new tax reform bill, the end result is always the same. Taxes are cut for the wealthy and taxes are increased on ordinary middle-class, working-class people. And the tax reform bill that was just passed has been hailed by experts as a huge benefit to the nation's most wealthy and corporations, while, again, increasing the burden on middle class and the working poor. And experts are saying it won't spur any economic growth because those wealthy corporations and individuals will just put the money in their pocket or they'll invest it overseas. And it will add another $1.5 trillion to the nation's deficits. And apparently at the last minute, the GOP snuck some pretty shady stuff into the tax reform bill. Some of it is handwritten notes. And there were even complaints from members of the Senate. The handwriting was so bad, they couldn't actually read what they were voting for. And that's always a dangerous sign. So according to this article coming out of Microsoft Network, House Republicans are already shooting down the tax bill's promises. And they're already getting ready to block some of the key legislative promises that Senate Republicans demanded in exchange for their vote on tax reform legislation. Because there was a lot of deal-making going on. A lot of Republicans didn't want to vote for this. And so the leadership said, well, if you vote for it, we will give you some of this other legislation. Now they're pulling back on it. We got your vote. We don't need you anymore. And apparently some of the arguments were regarding the repeal of Obamacare, which has been an unmitigated disaster. And apparently House Republicans now want to end the program that provided student loan forgiveness for public interest jobs. In other words, if you graduated and you went into a job that served the public interest, your debts could be written off here. And that was very helpful to these students. And right now, the student loan bubble is $1.3 trillion. A lot of these students aren't even able to make payments on those student loans. They're hoping for the loans to be forgiven, like this program was going to do. That's now going to be cut. And so where will the budgetary acts fall next? Pentagon spending? Heck no. Apparently House Speaker Charles McCall and Governor Fallin are over in Oklahoma. They're already out there talking about cuts to Medicare. And we were hearing that at the federal level a few days ago. Well, they're just old sick people. Why should we spend money on them? We need more bombs, and we need more bullets, and we need artillery, and we need more F-35s and other really impressive-looking military-type things. Now, as we mentioned the other day, Russia has started selling bonds denominated in the Chinese yuan. And the Moscow Stock Exchange is about ready to issue almost $1 billion worth of these yuan-denominated bonds. And this is the start of a new financial system that is not based on the U.S. dollar, according to analysts. Now, Russia's going to issue the 6 billion yuan bonds with a 5-year maturity in either this month or next month. It says it's testing the water for future investments. This is only going to accelerate the U.S. agenda for war against Russia and China, because the U.S. government is trapped by that Federal Reserve note. Following the end of World War II and that Bretton Woods agreement, our economic rulers became lazy. There was all this money just automatically coming in from the rest of the world having to use the U.S. dollar for cross-border trading and banking. And they just let the money roll on in, and they let our manufacturing decline. And then as a final punctuation, they went with that GMO experiment, which has backfired horribly. Nobody wants those products. So this country doesn't really have a lot to sell to keep our economy going. And our trade deficit is something like $1.5 billion every single day right now. If the world stops using the dollar, there is nothing left to hold this economy up. And hence, all of these wars on nations to force them back into using the U.S. dollar. And ultimately, war on the yuan and war on the ruble. And they are unfortunately, apparently, very willing to risk the incineration of the surface of planet Earth in this ridiculous argument over whose brand of ink and paper we should all be using. And here's where it really gets sick. In the days of Bretton Woods, where accounts were still being settled with boxes of banknotes or bullion, silver and gold, having a single recognized, acknowledged global currency actually made sense. But in this day and age of instantaneous global financial transaction and confirmation, there is no need for a single currency. And every reason for countries to simply trade in whatever currencies best suit their own interests. And that's another reason why this is a failed U.S. agenda. All righty. Let's see. We're going to take some phone calls here. We're going to start with Jennifer in Dallas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to talk about something else about Alice Walton, but, like, now that you mentioned the student loan thing, I graduated in 1996 from a college in Texas, right?
Yeah.
And they just stopped calling me. I think that they're embarrassed that I can't pay. I owe about $15,000 or more in student loans, right? They just stopped calling me. And it's like they've just, like, I think that people who are, like, this old, I'm 44 years old. You know, I mean, like, so they kind of like, you know, I still owe $15,000, and they just don't even bother me anymore. Now it's like it's kind of, I think they wrote it off.
Well, that may be the case here, and what's going on with a lot of debt, given the current state of the economy, is the debt may have been sold off to a collection company, and the collection company will try and collect, but they're probably going to look into your assets. And if they look at your financial situation and realize there's no way they're going to get the money, then they're just going to drop it and figure, right. Well, you know, we'll just write it off.
I mean, like, yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
No, I'm saying, like, I think that's what's happened. I mean, I haven't been called over, like, 2 or 3 years over these loans. I mean, like, they used to call me all the time, and now they don't. You know? All
right, well, you got off lucky. I wouldn't brag about that too much on a radio show, in case they decide to change their mind and make an example of you.
Right. I mean, I didn't say my last name. So anyway, the reason I called you is about Alice Walton. Alice Walton is, you know who that is, right?
Yes.
Alice. All right. So anyway, like, I'm a school teacher. Like, I went to college and I graduated, and I taught school for 13 years. Well, I got a DWI in 2011, and so what was so weird, I was looking at my mugshot, and then I saw Alice Walton's mugshot for her 5th DWI in the same county as I got mine, right? She's her 5th. She's like, this woman is actually a very bad alcoholic, right?
Yes.
And she's actually where she was, like, actually killed somebody before and, like, you know, got off on it. Well, by the time I got out of all my trouble, in the same county, she lives here in Texas. She was living here in Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alice Walton. So whenever I was, like, out of all my trouble, I noticed that she got out of her trouble, but by the cop, he, like, paid him off, and he was, like, out of the country, like, moved to Fiji. He just paid him off, like, you know. And basically, also, too, like, the Clintons, like, so here, really weird thing happened. So all of a sudden, I met this girl online, right? I'm a lesbian. I met this girl online, so I kind of, like, went to Arkansas for a few months. So all of a sudden, I was like, went to the Walmart, the headquarters, right? I was like, I'm going to talk to this. I said, you know, maybe she can help me get a job teaching again, because, you know, she should. We should be like kindred souls here. Like, she has DWIs, I do too. Maybe she can help me get a job teaching again. And then I was like banned from the whole place, and like, so I went to this place, right, where it was like the headquarters of Walmart, right. So I was like, hey, I'm here to, like, talk about Alice Walton. They're like, well, you can't do that. You know, I went to my car, and they're like, going, did you just come in here? Now you're banned. You're banned from being here again.
Okay, well,
crazy. Like, I mean,
we get a lot of stories about strong-arm tactics by Walmart security people.
Right. I mean, I just went in there, like, you know, was like, I know who Alice Walton is, and they were kind of like, well.
Did you have any prior friendship with her or anything?
No.
Well, I mean, it stands to reason, you know, somebody who's that much of an icon, if you will, within the company, you can't just walk into any large corporation and ask to see the top executives. I mean, that's true for Walmart. That's true for any industry. These people are sheltered and protected by their underlings. It's like trying to walk into Universal Studios and just ask for a meeting with Steven Spielberg. It's not going to happen.
I know, Mike.
Okay, well then.
I mean, basically.
Okay, so
right,
Jennifer, I'm going to have to let you go. We're running short on time, and the phone lines are loading up here. So let's switch to Tom in Utah. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. About 6 months ago, I contacted you. Since I'm visually impaired, I didn't know that I was guiding you to my website, which was not fully active, and not all elements were there. But I got to tell you, in spite of that difficulty, many of your listeners have contacted me, and they've been preserved from injury. So anyway, if you go into GassingAmerica.com now, the elements should be there. And you know, as a master thespian, if you don't have motion and photos, you don't have anything. And that's what I was directing you to before, is I didn't realize that the elements that were video and photographs were not there, so it was very rough reading, I'm sure.
Okay, can you spell that URL for me?
Just gassing, like you're gassing your vehicle. GassingAmerica.com. I do have some aliases. Manufactured Madness. Is that easy to remember?
Oh, I remember who you are. You're the person who was concerned, and justifiably so, about mobile homes that are contaminated with formaldehyde and possible ventilation problems for carbon monoxide. Where you and I disagree is that you seem to think this is a deliberate plot, whereas I would chalk it up to the usual value engineering that we see from American companies these days.
Well, I buy that accidental, except this have been there for 42 years, and nobody's done anything about it. When I testified to the issue in D.C., there were a lot of very angry people. In fact, just a side note, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, they investigated and proved my discovery was correct, or my findings were correct.
Well, look, hang on a second. We're almost out of time, so let me respond. Look at the vaccine problems. We know they go back decades. Nothing gets done. Congress actually held hearings on the link between prescription antidepressants and violence. They did nothing. If the motor home company has enough money for lobbyists, they don't need to change things that's going to cost them money. And that's just the way the country works right now. Anyway, Tom, we got to let you go. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with the last segment of today's program. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take one more phone call, and that's from Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I wish it was as warm up here as it is in Hawaii.
Actually, it's been very cool here. We've been dipping down into the 60s.
That's swimming pool water up here in Canada.
Yeah, I imagine so.
All about that dollar. It's the dollar. You have to make money. About the dollar. That's all it's about. We have something for sale, and this is how much it costs, whatever the market will bear. Sometimes it goes against your will to engage in that commerce. But there is that commercial on your website, that lady that says the United States government is an interwoven, basically a bunch of companies interwoven in this exchange, whether it be, legitimate or not. But most of the world runs that way, doesn't it? This private central banking nonsense.
Yes.
And, debt-based monetary system. It's the way it is.
But it doesn't have to be that way it is. And again, with all this talk about an impending major correction, because of economic globalism, when one goes down, it could easily drag the rest of them with it. And the people of planet Earth have to be ready to stand up and say, okay, we're going to restart, but no more private central banks. We go back to a public currency that's treated as a public utility that supports commerce and is not turned into a system to simply plunder wealth from the public by loaning the public currency into circulation, especially after just making it up out of thin air.
If one thing that these cryptocurrencies teaches us is work can produce results. Because, you know, these things aren't just, you know, hey, I have an idea, I'll write it down on a piece of paper and I'll give it to you. No, they have to actually, you know, mathematically create these algorithms that is cryptocurrency. I mean, you have to expend some energy to do this thing. It's like you said with the electro. Let's tie this to that and boom.
Well, unfortunately at the moment, and this is why I keep talking about tulips, the price of Bitcoin is expanding way beyond that initial cost of computational energy to create them. And that's why I feel it is being manipulated. Again, I would be very cautious. Now, I am going to keep my promise to that other caller and look into blockchain.org and set up a wallet and try and learn more about this. But again, I think we need to go back to a commodity-based currency that is managed and created by the government, spent into circulation to buy what the government needs, flows through commerce without accruing interest to a privately owned central bank, and then is taxed back in the exact same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. That's the system our country started with. It worked for the nation. It worked for the people. The bankers didn't like it, and they succeeded in hijacking it and putting us back under the exact same system of banking we fought the American Revolution to break free of.
Exactly.
Okay, well, thank you for the call. We're going to have to let you go because there's the music, and it's time for me to get off the air and make way for John Stedmiller, who's coming on with his own show with lots of interesting information. So stay tuned for that. What you learn here in the radio show at the WhatReallyHappened.com website, share it with everyone that you know. We all have to work together to push back against the corporate media. Looking at that poll coming out of Alabama, we're winning. We're winning the war against the corporate media liars, the prostitutes and correspondents. Now